Oos. Difference between martial arts combat sports and the martial arts school sparring. Alright, I'm gonna explain the difference between competitive sports, like say boxing, kickboxing, MMA, UFC, and say that you have a martial arts school, a gym, and you're just sparring. What I mean by sparring, I mean you're executing the techniques, but not full force. So you're basically just touching, right? I used to run a martial arts school with my dad back in the early 90s. And, we would spar, and in other gyms I used to train in, we would do sparring too, right? Majority of the time we wear mouthpiece and a cup, just for protection. Sometimes we wear shin pads, helmet, a headgear, hand gear, foot gear, right? This is just taking precaution when you wear the headgear, the cup, and the shin pads because it depends on who you're training with. You might be training with somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, and you can end up hurting them. So it's just a fact of you want to take precaution so you don't get severe injuries, right? So when I mean by sparring or the difference between combat sports and sparring, in a sense, and I think I mentioned this before, in a lot of martial arts schools, a lot of gyms, sometimes the sparring or the training in the school is worse than the sport itself, than the competition itself. Because sometimes you are sparring guys in the gym who are not your same weight class, you know. There is no referee, and sometimes there's no time limit. So you're just basically freestyling in the gym. And a lot of times these guys will come in, save the first day, and they would probably, see a lot of fights on TV and MMA, and they think that, they can do what they see on TV. So they have this competition thing where they want to see if they can knock the person out. So majority of the time, as I mentioned before, is like with combat sports and boxing and all these things, if you have a school and you are sparring in your gym, you're already competing. The only difference is that you're not competing for money. You're not doing it professionally, but you are sparring. Once you're sparring in your gym, you are basically, you can say you're fighting. Because majority of the time, even though you're saying, hey man, let's go lightly, so forth, sometimes the person like might kick you hard or punch you hard. In your mind, you have that competitive thing that, oh, I want to get him back. Even though, you say, oh, I'm going lightly, I'm not a competition and all this and that. But in your mind, you know that you're competing. Just be real, just be honest about it. And as I said, from my experience, I've seen a lot of gym fights, and I've been in gym fights that are way worse than combat sports. And what I mean by it's a little more aggressive because, as I mentioned, in the schools, in the gyms, it depends on what school you go to, what martial arts school you go to. Sometimes you have people coming in there who you never met before, and they can overweigh you by 20, 30 pounds, right? And even though it depends if you own the school or not, usually if you own the school, it's like you're setting your own rules. So it's kind of like, you're putting on a competition because now you set the rules that maybe, you can't poke in the eye, you can't kick in the groin, you can't grapple, you can't take me down. So in a sense, you're basically just making up your own competition with your own rules. So it's kind of the same thing as if you're fighting a combat sport, UFC, you're gonna set your rules depending if you run the school. But as I said, I've been in gym fights and I've seen gym fights where bones been broken, ankles snap, guys been knocked out cold, like serious knockouts, name it, the serious injuries, broken ribs, everything. Just some serious injuries, just like if it was a combat sports, a competition anywhere. So as I said, a lot of people, not mentioning the names, some people will say, oh, I'm not for combat sports, not for this, no competition. But then you have a school where you're sparring and kicking and punching each other, full force. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't make any sense. It's like you're being a hypocrite. It's like you're basically doing the same thing as combat sports, but probably worse. because some schools, when they're sparring, they don't use mouthpiece or any groin protector or no shin protector, nothing like that. So the injuries that you can get from just sparring in the gym, it's basically the same thing you get in combat sports, but probably worse. And the sad thing about it is that you might be the one hurting the person that's coming in. You see what I'm saying? You might be the one to inflict, the harm on that person. You see? And usually when you have people coming into your school, like when we run our school, you know, if you're a beginner, we don't make you spar. We teach you the techniques. We teach you how to move first, how to walk, footwork, movement. We teach you how to throw a proper punch, a proper kick before you even start sparring. There's nothing named sparring for you. Nowhere, even for a month, 2 months, you won't even be able to punch or kick anybody yet. You gotta know how to properly move first, even properly know how to walk before you can even punch and kick. You gotta know how to defend the techniques before you even spar, because then you're gonna end up hurting yourself and probably hurting your opponent. So that's what I'm trying to explain to you. Even though you say you're sparring, it usually is not sparring. Usually it's at 100%. It all depends on who you're sparring with. Sometimes you take it up a notch higher than what it's supposed to be, right? And a lot of this is all on control too, and depends, as I said, who you're sparring. A lot of times you have guys who have control and who can control the technique to where they don't injure the person, which is the best person to spar. Because if you have a man who can control his body movement, control the kicks, control the punches so it won't hurt you, that's the best person to spar. You don't want to spar somebody who's out of control and just throw kicks with all the might and throw punches with all the might to where they can hurt themselves and hurt you. You don't want to spar anybody like that. You see what I'm saying? So, in my opinion, from my journey, from what I've learned, from over my 30 odd years of training in martial arts and training in different schools now, not only in my martial arts school, I've been in different gyms, 6, 7, 8 different gyms I've been in, sparring and competing against people. I have known and I've learned that in the gym is sometimes worse than the competitive sports itself. The training in the gym, the sparring, the preparation is worse than the actual fight itself. Because usually in the gym is where you get all your injuries from before you even get into the fight. So what's the difference between the two? In my opinion, from my journey, it's not much of a difference. It all depends on who you're sparring in your school, in your martial arts school, and who's coming in for the first time, and how hard you're going, and if you're even wearing any cup or mouthpiece. Because I see a lot of people lose their teeth in the gym, get kicked in the nuts so hard where they have to go to the hospital. I see people get knocked out cold with head kicks, broken nose, broken rib. Just name it, everything. And this is not competition. There's no money for it. They're just sparring. You see what I'm saying? So in the combat sports, it all depends. Yeah, there are some devastating injuries in combat sports. A broken skull, broken leg, broken rib, broken nose. But again, in the gym, martial arts schools, there could be the same kind of injuries there. What I'm saying? At least in the combat sports, they have rules. They have time limit. Sometime in the gym, depends if you're in the gym, you make your own rules. You just freestyle whatever you want. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I'm saying. When people say, I'm not into combat sports, into this MMA or kickboxing or boxing, not into it. So why do you have a school where you're sparring and kicking and punching each other? Don't make sense. And of course, martial arts for self-defense only. And you can train self-defense techniques without kicking and punching each other at 100% rate. You could do defense, knife, gun, weapon defense, and so forth. But when you're saying that you're against something, but then you're basically doing the same thing in your school, but you don't have no rules and you're not wearing any protection gear, you're basically doing worse than the combat sports itself. So of course, from my experience, from my journey, yeah, gym fights are can be, and some of them are worse than the MMA fights itself or competition sports. And we all say, oh, we're not competing, only light. But it never end up being light. Coming from my journey, and I've been through a couple of schools, it's never light sparring. Never. Whenever you hit somebody, in a way where they don't like it, they're gonna hit you back. And sometimes they try to hit you back harder, or even try to knock you out, like what I've seen and have happened and have done in a lot of gym fights. So it's just one of those things, man. And as I mentioned before, you will have people coming in who don't know anything about sparring or boxing or kickboxing, or don't even know how to throw a proper punch, much less a kick. They don't even know how to move in and move out, footwork. They don't know any movement. They don't know how to defend against a kick or a punch. So I mean, you gotta learn the basics, man. You gotta learn how to properly walk, movement before you start kicking and punching, man. That's just what it is. And you gotta know that, yeah, there are competitive sports out there, but once you're in your gym sparring each other and kicking with no protective gear on, is just basically close or the same as doing combat sports, man. The only thing that you're not getting paid for it. That's it. I want to hear what you guys think about this topic, right? Have you guys ever been into a gym sparring, martial arts school sparring, where it turned into more than just sparring, and injuries happen? Also, I want to know your opinion on martial arts school sparring, being close to combat sports competition. If you guys think that there is a difference between them or they're kind of the same thing. So just want to hear you guys' point of view on this topic.